ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, all the way down to the toddlers that are listening to this. I know there's probably young people listening to this for sure, bro.
You reckon?
Yeah, I reckon our youngest listeners like 8. That's my guess. 8 or 9. That's my guess.
Probably.
I reckon.
Maybe. I know.
Well, welcome to the Uncovered Podcast with Nick and Femi. It's your boy Femi.
Yes.
The smooth sounds.
Smooth sounds of
Mr. Smooth Chocolate Femi.
Remember that used to be a nickname?
Yeah, I used to be a nickname, Mr. Smooth Chocolate.
Crazy.
That was
smooth
cool.
dark chocolate.
Well, I just leave it a chocolate. That's okay.
Yeah, that's why I was a bit misleading.
Whatever flavor of chocolate is irrelevant, but yeah,
it's still chocolate at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, and it's still very smooth.
Exactly.
That's facts.
And it's your boy Nick. What's going on, people?
Man, this is a beautiful, beautiful day.
Yeah.
You know, shout out to my Muslim brothers and sisters here in the holy month. We recognize you. We see you guys, man. We got a lot of Muslim listeners, a lot of Muslim friends. So we want to just stand in there, recognize you.
Sure.
You know, if you're doing your thing during Ramadan. But yeah, man, we're here to talk about something that's really, really sick today, actually. We actually had this conversation not long ago, and we thought that, you know what? Whether you like it or not, we're going to record it this time.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about it, because like we have these conversations quite a bit, actually, which is kind of we're fortunate of the fact that we're in a space where we have that container for ourselves to be able to have those real conversations. And I think that I know a lot of people, it's a bit of a stretch for a lot of people to do it for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and we're talking about vulnerability, right?
I thought you were going to intro it a little bit smooth, but that's why I was trying to avoid using that language.
My bad, bro, because I was like, this is people might be like, what the hell are these guys on about?
That was the point.
My bad. That's what you're putting this on. My bad.
That's all good, man.
My bad. I recognize that.
I got to do some extra work.
But yeah. Anyway, back. Let's pretend that didn't happen. So sorry, continue on, sir.
You really killed it. But anyways, basically, we're talking about vulnerability.
Yes,
but it's powerful because every time we have like a real, raw, vulnerable conversation, like it always gives you that, after the conversation, you're always in introspection. You're just like, damn.
Yeah.
Which is so powerful for growth and especially with our mental health. So I think that, for you guys listening at the moment, you might not want to hear it, but it's so powerful. We're going to continue to preach it because it's a game changer.
100%. And I think that's what we've always said. And I've always looked at it in terms of our business and our friendship is as a superpower of our ability to be vulnerable and real and recognize we don't know shit about shit, right? And realizing that in life is a very humbling thing because, it's usually the first sign of growth and it's usually the first opportunity for learning. I think that's what we really value is that growth and learning phases in our life. So if that's you and you struggle with being vulnerable, strap in, baby. We're about to teach you how to be vulnerable. We're going to teach you about the value of vulnerability and the opportunity that it has and the opportunity cost for not being vulnerable.
Yes, sir.
Not being vulnerable.
Yes, sir. I think a cool way to kind of get into it is that let's discuss what does being vulnerable actually look like? What is it?
Yeah. Do you know what's actually very interesting? I think about this all the time and it's like vulnerability isn't just about talking about awkward situations, right?
No.
Because you can have an awkward situation that you couldn't care less about if people know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like, yeah, I farted yesterday.
Do you think that's what people assume vulnerability to be?
No. I'm just giving a very silly example, right? Just to hone in my point.
Okay.
But I think that vulnerability is pure honesty and raw honesty and being real about the situation, about your feelings and what's going on, regardless of the outcome and understanding that these outcomes are, could potentially be detrimental to your, reputation, your personality, your perception. But I guess like that's what I think in terms of like what we're having the conversation. But in terms of like generally what vulnerability is, just being open to whatever can come.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when you're putting yourself out there, you're open to good stuff, but you're also open to the bad repercussions that can happen. It's kind of like, if you're fighting someone, right, you got your guard up, but the moment you start fighting, you start throwing, yes, you are attacking, but you're also vulnerable. You put your hands down, you're vulnerable to, whatever can come to you. So
yeah, I think I like the extended definition that you had because it gives people a bit more perspective because, being open can be interpreted so many different ways. But when you define it the way you did at the beginning, I think it's really, I think it hits home and it gives a lot more clarity for people because it's really, really important to have a clear understanding about it and understand that, sometimes your vulnerabilities might drag in a little bit of criticism and feedback that you're not open to, but, having the acknowledgement of that and being okay with that is really, really important. So even when I look at it like, damn, I'm really just about to surrender. I'm just about to lay myself raw and be like, bang, like.
I like that word.
What?
That surrender was really powerful.
It is powerful because that's essentially what you're doing, right? Like, I think that when you get to a point where you're like, you know what, like, I'm literally just going to lay myself here on the table and I'm going to tell you what's real. And going into any any conversation where you're about to be vulnerable with that kind of like mindset and frame, it allows you to be open to the growth and the feedback. Because sometimes a lot of us, we don't want to hear the negative feedback, things that, you know, might trigger more emotions, and that could be like more sadness or anger off the back of it. Yeah. But it's always after the back you hear something negative or someone being critical with you is when you get the most amount of growth, because you're able to be like, okay, I see, I understand that, you know, I'm not perfect, or I have these flaws, or people are noticing this about me. Let me kind of reflect on it and not dismiss it. So I think that when you go in with that frame, it's so powerful, and it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation.
Feedback is the lifeblood of growth, man.
Yeah.
Like, for sure. You can't grow, you can't progress in anything.
Yeah.
Relationship, life, personal development, whatever, without feedback.
For sure.
And I think that vulnerability allows you some opportunity for feedback, not only from the external person, but also from yourself. It's like, when I'm vulnerable, that made me feel good. I'm starting to remove the power of that story in our life. So yeah, 100%. Feedback is powerful. I'm excited for this conversation, and I think that there's going to be a lot of learnings to be had. So I want to ask you a question, young Nicholas.
Yo, talk to me.
Young N-I-C-K.
Nick Eve.
Notorious N-I-C.
Nick Eves.
You like that one? Notorious N-I-C?
I don't like Notorious.
Do you know what's crazy? I found that so funny the first time so I was talking to this is so off topic, but when I heard that first time, it was...
What, Notorious?
No. I was talking to my friend of mine, right? And her name on Instagram was Notorious N-I-C. Oh shit, I don't know why I just outed her.
You just outed her whole IG.
No, it was a long time ago.
When I said the beep.
No, it was a long time ago, right? So it's probably changed.
It was yesterday, man. No. Because you're like, I was thinking about this the other day. So
look, to be honest, she went by the name. I don't know what.
Anyways, I hear your story, so just keep
Notorious N-I-C. I was like, that is actually bars, though. Like,
that's a fresh
name.
That's
a fresh name. Notorious N-I-C, and then was like Nicola or some shit.
That's banger.
That's crazy, honestly. Nicola, whatever your name is, wherever you at.
Notorious N-I-C.
Notorious N-I-C, that's gangster. Yeah. But anyway.
That's a banger to be honest.
It's a straight banger. If she doesn't have it, you should actually take it.
Yeah, Notorious N-I-C.
That is gangster. Anyway.
Yeah.
Young Nick. I want to ask you, bro, like, when was the moment that because you weren't always vulnerable. Like, I've known you for a long time, and you were definitely not always vulnerable. Right? What was the moment that made you want to begin your vulnerability journey and becoming more vulnerable? Because obviously it wasn't just a spark. It wasn't just like whoa, I'm going to start being vulnerable out of nowhere.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like obviously a transition. When did that start?
Yeah, when did it start? It probably started right, what's it now, 2021. So it probably started just as I was finishing high school, which was back in 2013. Wow.
Crazy.
I'm so old. That's ridiculous. 2013.
Actually makes me sick.
Wow. But I think that's when the whole kind of journey started. And I think the big kind of trigger for it was, and again, I don't know if my story is really applicable for a lot of people, but I'll say it anyway. It was just fortunate for me to be surrounded by a group of people that would still call me out regardless if I wanted to hear it or not. And I think that's what kind of allowed me to because I was the type of person that people were like I always said at the start, like when you don't actually lay yourself flat and you're open to the feedback, it has the adverse effect of being like, piss off, don't talk to me, or you don't know what you're talking about, I'm angry at my friend. It has that impact. And that's how I was feeling a lot of the times, but I was fortunate to have friends that still didn't care and they still just wanted to lay it to me raw.
What did you struggle being vulnerable with?
Look, I think one of my big challenges that come to mind, I know there was heaps. So one of the big things that I struggled with was actually admitting that I was wrong. Because it was like one of my big kind of like insecurities back in the day was in relation to, you know, my perception, how I was perceived. Yeah. And one of those is specifically perception around like intelligence and how academic you were was one of kind of my big things.
Yeah.
So to be told that I was wrong was to be told that you're stupid or you're dumb.
That's crazy.
So why?
Because I've never even heard this myself. Yeah. Like I didn't. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like, it was one of those things where it was like, well, I don't want to be labeled that way. I don't want to perceive that way. So therefore, if I'm going to be perceived that way, that's the natural connection that I have to it. So then for me to be able to acknowledge that I was incorrect was like, nah, I can't do that. Which is interesting though, because the moment that I stepped away from that, it's like, you know what, like being wrong doesn't actually mean that you're dumb. Being wrong is what actually opens my ability to be able to learn different things. Was that kind of perception that I had. But that was the challenge. That was one of the big things that I know that I struggled with. or even knowing that I'm overreacting. And I think that even overreacting, it's a challenging one still, and I won't kind of delve into that because like I feel like people's emotions regardless should still be able to be validated. I don't need to make people feel like you're overreacting. That's an incorrect way to respond from an emotional level.
What is overreacting, right? Like
exactly.
Just reacting.
Exactly.
What is over or under? What's the line?
Exactly. And I don't think there is, especially for someone looking at it from an external point of view. Like I don't think you're not in a position.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's more just like at the end of the day, whatever emotions you have, your response is your response. You can't. Yeah, I mean, you can't tell them that's wrong. Obviously,
there's angry,
and there's an appropriate and inappropriate response.
Of course.
But like,
that's why I didn't want to dial into it too much. I'm like, here we go.
Yeah, but it's hard to mention and not.
So we do that prayer frame that at the end of the day, it's like some things are not called for, not appropriate, but there's a fine line there.
Yeah, if you're angry, it's just feedback for yourself that you feel like your boundaries are being crossed.
Of course. But exactly right. So going back to what I was saying is that like to be told that though, that the feelings weren't being validated, and maybe just because it wasn't communicated correctly to make it feel like how I'm feeling, there's no point to feel that way.
Right.
You're overreacting, or that's not that doesn't deserve that kind of response.
Yeah.
And sometimes, to some degrees it was correct, but to some other degrees that it wasn't. And that made me hold a little bit of baggage because I felt like I'm not going to communicate because it's not being understood anyway. And that's something that I still struggle with to this day. Like sometimes I communicate or I don't feel like I'm really properly understood. So it holds me back, but at least I have the awareness that that's what's happening. And it's a journey that we continue to do to be able to really reveal that. But I think that was the starting point, was then it was like, that insecurity that I had then leading to other areas and emotions about me not being validated was then when I was like, you know what, let me be vulnerable. At least let me kind of share my perspective. And I think the big thing as well was being able to learn how to properly communicate it. Because I think that when it's not communicated correctly, that's when it's, you go back in this vicious cycle of still not being vulnerable or still not interpreting the feedback the way that you want to because you didn't articulate it correctly in the first place. So yeah, that was me anyway.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I actually like the thought of communicating something correctly, like your emotions or your whatever you're feeling. It's very interesting. I never actually thought about that being a barrier, but definitely, right? Like if you feel like, okay, I didn't word that right, and now people are seeing me as this, and that's just, it's like, no, I'm not saying that I'm that. I'm saying that I'm this, but now you're reacting to that, and that's not the same. Like it's a completely different ballgame, different vulnerabilities. Yeah, it is very complex. That's interesting. I've never actually thought about that. So I want to say, like, when you did start transitioning out of being, someone that doesn't open up, what did you find was the benefits? Where did you find was actually like why do it, right? Because it's hard. Like why do I need to? I was just no one needs to know everything about me, right?
I mean, there's so many benefits to it. It's really beneficial in terms of my own processing and understanding of how I'm feeling, to be able to kind of have that person or that thing where you can just use as your outlet and just kind of express was really, really powerful. The second part of that as well was just that release of the baggage, because I always say, like, our emotions, our traumas, the things that we go through, it's a somatic experience. We physically feel it, and it physically kind of weighs us down and has hold on us. So to be able to kind of just express it and lay it out there was just kind of like that feeling of like a freedom and like a release of a lot of these particular emotions and stuff that I've been feeling. It's like this big bag that you've just put on the floor, and you're like, okay, like I've laid it out there. And then you continue the transitions to growth and acceptance of what's kind of going on, depending on what you've been vulnerable with. So that's what I found really valuable when it comes to being vulnerable, and that's why I continue to do it, because that's one of my big values is to grow, and growth entails me to be vulnerable and accept feedback. So that's why it aligns well with me.
100%. I think the big thing that you kind of alluded to was when you've got this secret or thing that you're embarrassed about, or maybe you don't want to be open about, whichever way you want to say it. Yeah. Right. It gives it all this power. Yeah. It gives it this power over you that you can't be authentically yourself. You can't live the life that you want to live. It's like, oh, I can't go there because then people will know that I'm this. Yeah. I can't act this way because then people are going to ask questions. I'm going to be that. Yeah. It gives it power, right? Yeah. And the moment that you are vulnerable and open and honest and say, look, man, I'm struggling. I'm this, I'm that. I really, really, I'm living this type of life. Yeah. It removes the hold that it has, that you're saying, right? And allows you to be able to live your life under your terms, and you be the driver, not this, dickhead secret that you got, taking over the wheel. Yeah. And it's really powerful, especially like
guilt and shame is a really big thing in mental health, where, you know, some of our behaviors, some of the things that we did back in the days, we have that guilt and shame towards it that really hides its power on you. And really I'm a big believer that one of the big ways to break it is to be able to be vulnerable and just let it happen. But obviously getting there is a big process. So the question I want to ask you, because obviously it comes back to you, and we were speaking about this, might have been last week we were speaking about it, but, you know, I think it was valuable and it was something that I kind of like reflected on, and I think that our listeners would value from it. But it's in terms of like those labels and those things that people have on you, and then sometimes because you've been labeled that so much that you know, you might not have that nice association to it, so you're trying to break it, but then you don't want to bring it up because that's the label that people are going to have, even though you're trying to be vulnerable about it. Because I think, does that make sense?
Of course it does.
Yeah, so like talk to us about that from your perspective. And I'm sure, like any of us here, we've been labeled so many different things. So if you think about a label that kind of, you know, strikes a chord for you.
I mean, like something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I think that I mentioned to you in one of the conversations that we're having.
Yeah.
I didn't mention this topic, but I mentioned the issue, and it will make sense when I speak about it. And I think that because we're mental health clinicians, we're experienced, we have this, you know, this background, people forget that we're human and we have these struggles. And I always feel like I'm not allowed anymore to feel sad, lonely, upset, whatever it is, or to have these struggles, and to also struggle with other people's emotions too.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that like people have this expectation, like, oh, you're a mental health nurse, you should be able to deal with anything and anything and everyone that what they put onto you without giving you the opportunity to say, well, that's actually way too much for me to handle. And what I'm going through right now, I'm feeling sad, lonely, upset, empty. I'm also feeling emotionally overwhelmed. I'm also feeling like I've got way too much pressure on me from these people. People have this expectation because you're a mental health nurse, you should be able to deal with this. I remember this one time, right? This is crazy. I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm going to be real. I'm going to be open and honest. And, you know, no disrespect to the person that said this, if you're listening to it, that's so love, but like it's just something that stuck with me. I was talking to this person, right? And for whatever reason, you know, the situation didn't work out. And I think it's because that person has their own baggage and their own stuff that they got to deal with, right? And it didn't work out. And one of like the sister of the person, right, someone really close to them, came up to me and sat me down and spoke to me about it, and was like, I would have expected someone as a mental health clinician to be able to handle someone and date and accept that and date somebody like that. I'm like, hang on, wait.
Yeah.
Hang on, I still got my own struggles. I still got my own issues. I still got my own things. I still got my own preferences, standards, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that because we're mental health clinicians, we have this standard to be perfect, and we're not. And we still have things that we don't like, and we still have things that I'm not open to accepting. I feel like I don't get the space to be that. I feel like I don't get the space to be real and fail and you know, not be perfect and not always do the right thing. Sometimes I don't, you know. But I don't think people give you the grace and the space to do that.
Yeah, for sure. That's powerful, right? So like, because it's like kind of what we were saying is that when you get that, and I think that people that said it as well, it's not like they're saying it with bad intention.
Yeah, they're not.
They're definitely not. It's actually like a lot of praise to you being this person. But at the same time, that's how I
see you.
Yeah, but it's that lack of awareness that it makes it quite dangerous. And I think that's one of the big things that creep on a lot of people, which is why this is such a prevalent issue, is that those words that we don't have the insight is actually damaging is that what we continue to do. And that's what allows people to get into this cycle and spiral into like depression, you know, insecurities, anxiety, and all these things that we see, eating disorders as well being common. It's all off the back of those things that we hint with good intention that takes people into that. Which I think then, you know, with that being said, like what would have been kind of, what do people actually do? Because at the same time though, like this kind of is like you are this profession for a reason. Exactly. There's a certain level of like awareness that you have. It's just like when I speak to a doctor and like I'm speaking to a GP and I'm like, maybe something as simple as a flu that I have, but that wasn't identified. I'd be like, oh, like, you know, you're a GP. I would have assumed that you would have been able to, you know, pick that up or do the test to be like, oh, this guy's got a flu, for example. Yeah. Like that's kind of like what you expect because that's the profession. Like that's kind of the prerequisite.
But it's like saying that like you're a doctor. I would expect you to be able to like have a partner that's sick and cure them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the pressure and the expectation that person is asking me. Is like, I thought that you would have been able to manage this and fix this situation.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, I don't want to be working at home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? First of all. And it's not that person has any, I don't know what that person has. It's none of my business, but there was obviously a lot of emotional struggles that were difficult to handle.
Yeah.
So,
I think that it's quite problematic, and that's why I think it's interesting to have the kind of conversation, because to be honest, from my perspective, I actually don't know, but I can obviously identify it to be a problem, because even if we look at parental conditioning, it's like some of those big things happen off the back of good intent, but saying things that they don't actually realize is damaging. So how do we approach it? What do we do? Like, how do we, I know this is kind of going off the topic of vulnerability, but it was just an interesting thought about like, well, how do we address it? What, like, when we have expectations on people, which, you know, to some degree, I guess, like, yeah, it makes sense why you would think that way. But how do we be mindful? Does it come down to us then leading back to the topic, being vulnerable and be like, yo, like, you know what? Like, that's not, I don't know why you felt that way, or that's not actually who I am. I've got my own challenges. Like, what do we do to kind of break that?
I guess the thing I always think about is like, well, what's the purpose of you putting that expectation on that person? Right. Everybody has expectations for everybody, right? Sure. Internally. That's how the world works, right? But what's the purpose of me unloading that expectation onto you? If there is no purpose, I don't know why we would do that. I don't know. You know what I mean? So like, I don't feel like I'm talking about in terms of like what the way we see someone and then letting them know, I would expect you to do this. I would expect you to do that. I think that I think that you're doing this. I think you're doing that. I think allowing people to be aware of their capability is one thing, but setting a set of expectations is another thing. Communicating to somebody that, bro, I see you being capable and having the potential to reach this height. It's up to you, bro. But like, I really think that you're really, really capable. And then having the conversations like, you should do this. Why aren't you doing that? Yeah. Like, you should, you have to. Like, why can't you? You know, why not? One is uplifting, one is damaging. Yeah. And I think that's going to come down to the way that we kind of like put that in. Because like, one isn't actually an expectation. One is just one is more just like I guess like a elevation, I would say. Yeah. And the other one is a massive kind of like weight of expectation. Like, oh my God, like I'm expecting this. Like there is no if, buts, or maybes. That one's like, if you want to, you can, but it's up to you. Whatever you want to do. The other one's like, why? Like, what's wrong with you? I think that's the way that we've got to approach it, man. Just be really, really mindful of the other people's, what people are going through, and not put that expectation, man. When have you ever put an expectation on someone and it's been beneficial? I can't remember. No,
it's never been beneficial. But like, one of the challenges that I find is that, again, not intentional, and I think that it's something that everybody's gonna go through. And I'm going to slip on it. I have slipped up on it all the time. Of course. And it's like that feeling about when you do it, though, you don't want it to be something that continues to spiral on for so long. Yeah. So then would you also say then it's a responsibility of the receiver to be like, you know, let me kind of like stop you there? Or should they just like take it with a grain of salt and be like?
I think that's a massively loaded question. And it's hard. It's very hard for me to answer that in the set amount of time that we have in
Maybe
this
we
podcast.
can park it, but it's just an interesting thought, because it's like, yeah, we need to be mindful, but it's not saying that we're always going to be correct and we're always going to get it right. So when we do get it wrong,
how do you do the self-work to be able to mitigate that?
Especially when it's not intentional. But you know what? That's like you said, it's a big question.
That's a huge question. I guess like my only thing, because I don't want to brush it off, I think the only thing I would say, right, is I think that when you're hearing things that are unhelpful, I think it comes down to your own self-awareness and being a little bit more solid in where you're at and what's going on in your life, right? Yep. And being aware that that's just that person, projecting. Yeah. Not necessarily has anything to do with you, and just understanding that it's something that it's a projection. It's a projection from their side, not your side. So I think that having that level of self-awareness is going to be the first and probably most important part of it. Yeah. So, but again, that's a very superficial answer for a very deep question. So I would love for us to have that conversation.
We should definitely delve into it. And again, I'm not saying that I have the answer. I'm probably going to have to do a lot more of like research on that, because that's life, to be honest. Like, to say to be mindful and just that's the way to do it. It's like, come on, bro, be realistic. Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm like, I don't have the answer, but but I really and truly do think that a lot of like life's issues can be not solved but addressed. Yeah.
through self-awareness and self-reflection and kind of being sure in yourself. And I think it's like that confusion and lack of clarity as to what's going on that sparks doubt in your mind. The reason why people are anxious, the reason why people get that, no, that's an unfair thing to say, but like the reason why a lot of these issues, not all the time, there's obviously a lot of complications that happen. Yeah. But the reason why a lot of these things happen, especially in this context, is because of that doubt. It's like, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be that? Yeah. Should I have been able to handle this situation? Yeah. What, you know what I mean? But that's what it is. So I think that if we increase our self-awareness, it's easier to be able to handle it. Because if I wasn't as self-aware, that could have been really damaging to me. Yeah. Because I was like, even me at first, I was taken aback. I was like, oh shit,
is this my fault?
Did I F up?
Yeah, did I F it up? Exactly.
Like, is it me? Is it my weakness? Is it my downfall? Yeah. Of course it's not.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, of course it's not. But imagine if I hadn't done the work that I have done to be able to be here. Not that I'm great, but I've just done the work to be able to understand myself a little bit and be like, no, nigga, like I don't want to do that. So I don't have to.
Exactly.
But somebody else that is just hearing that could easily be like, whoa.
Exactly. No, I find that it's very insightful. It's quite a fascinating thing to kind of delve into. And I mean, like for the people that are listening to the podcast right now, I think that like one of the big questions I'll have for you at the moment is going back to the topic is like, how vulnerable are you in terms of these particular things that based on how we defined it at the start, based on some of the examples that we've showcased in our life at the moment is, you know, how open are you? Do you have that element of surrender? In your life and with the people that you speak to, you know, how do you vent? How do you release it? Because like you said, because if you're not vulnerable, and going back to the title being like the power of vulnerability, is that if you're not powerful, if you don't, what am I saying? If there's no power in your vulnerability, because I got you know what happened? You know what happened?
DJ Khaled.
You know what happened? Shit. I was looking at something on the table, and I got distracted looking at it that I forgot what I was saying, which is so crazy mid sentence.
That is crazy. Yeah, that's okay.
But what I was saying, basically going back to what I was saying, is that knowing the power of the vulnerability, knowing that what it does in terms of helping us gain our awareness, you want to really ask yourself the question of being like, well, am I at that point? Because if we're not at that point, then like a lot of these insecurities, a lot of these examples I was saying, they probably spiral in a way that's so hidden. And that's the thing with mental health. It's not always so evident that it's like, okay, like this is actually affecting me like that. It creeps into you. So it's a really big thing to be practicing as much as you can.
100%. Did you say were you asking me how vulnerable I am, or you are saying
no to the audience, to the listeners, to the listeners, to be asking yourself that question.
But that is a great question for you though. Like how open and honest, how vulnerable do you think that you actually truly are? Do you think that you're actually out here being naked, like
all the time,
like to your friends or close people or whatever? Like,
oh, that's a great question. I think that for me, like, do you want me to scale it from like 1 to 10? Is that
just
what kind
your
of gives you?
This is a qualitative answer.
It's a qualitative answer. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm just trying to do it in a way that makes sense. Well, from my subjective opinion, I think that I'm quite, especially with the people that are around me, like my friends, people that get it. I feel like I'm quite vulnerable from that respect.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting because they're like my parents and family, I don't feel like I'm as vulnerable, and obviously there's a lot of pressure still that I'm still working
to them.
From them based on what I do, that if I was to be vulnerable and showcase it with them, it might have a bit of an impact. So that's why I'm still kind of trying to navigate that.
So you're not vulnerable to your family, is what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, as much as I want to be. But definitely like with friends, people that get it. And I think that's what I'm saying. I'm quite fortunate because it's like I have people that get it. And I feel like everyone's got people that get it, but people that are stuck in the loop that I can relate to, like with family, for example, then it's a bit of a journey, because I can't imagine some of the things that I could say at the moment, and this is just me being raw, that if I had to tell them and really like let them know how I feel, I don't know if it'd be receptive. And there's obviously cultural barriers to that as well that makes it hard, but that's where I'm at.
But that's the thing, man. It's so hard because it's like, well, then isn't that vulnerability? Like understanding what can come from that, but still being open and honest and real to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying you should do anything. I'm just saying like
that is vulnerability.
That is vulnerability. Vulnerability isn't, vulnerability. The power in vulnerability isn't doing it in a safe environment. It's doing it in situations where you don't know how it's going to come out and how it's going to be received.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's very true. And it definitely, vulnerability is not something that's easy. It's definitely hard. And that's like, you know, it's kind of like what we spoke about earlier, which is offline, the podcast, is like those marginal kind of steps that you take towards it. Like you can look at it as a big over, like, oh shit, like this is too much to do. So you're not going to do it at all. But if you take small marginal steps each time, that will eventually get to that end goal. That's the main thing. Because I think for me, one of my biggest kind of, the big barrier as to why I don't do it is not exactly what they're going to say back to me, but it's, again, I'm really nailed into the what happens from a growth perspective off the back of it. And for some of the things that I'd want to talk to them about, I just don't know if it would result in any form of growth. I think that it could just be something that's passed off, like, oh, whatever, and it doesn't really transcend into anything. So then in my head, it's like, what's the point of having that conversation? So that's that's my big barrier, not what they're actually going to say to me. I know that I still have faith that my parents will love me unconditionally. I have enough awareness to be like, yeah, they might throw labels and stuff. It's not their fault, but it doesn't define me. I have that awareness, but I'm more like, okay, well, what comes off the back of that is the big thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's
interesting, dude. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
facts. All right, I can get down with that. I think that's a very, like, a solid kind of perspective in terms of how things are going. Very insightful.
Yeah. What about you?
What about me?
That same question.
How vulnerable am I?
Yeah.
I think that I used to not tell my family anything. I think that, like, if you grew up ethnic, I don't even want to say African. If you grew up ethnic, generally speaking, from a lot of people I've spoken to, it is so hard to be real and open and honest with your parents. It's a real issue, right?
Yeah.
But it's crazy because obviously the people that know you the best,
exactly.
You know, and with your family.
But
so
do they?
They've known you the longest,
but the best.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But then it's crazy. They're probably like, they've known you the longest. So, like, they obviously play some kind of role. I'm talking about in a typical, you know, obviously if you got different dynamics in your family, I'm just talking it from, like, I'm saying, pretending that, you know, you still have a relationship with your parents is what I'm saying. So no, you know, it could be anything. But I'm just saying for us, right, for my particular situation, right, they know me well, right? I think that they definitely do know me well in my deepest and rawest forms. I don't think anybody sees me as upset or as angry or as lost or as confused or really seeing me raw the way my family does. But I still have those reservations for a lot of reasons for them. But I think generally speaking to other people, I'm a very open and honest person because like I've said to you so many times, like, man, like, I've gone past the stage of being that, like, caring, like, just giving a shit what, like, someone says. And it's not because I'm SK, like, I'm so cool. It's more just because I've really started to value that feeling of, like, when I do open and I am vulnerable, it's like it's a euphoric feeling, right? And I really do see it as a superpower. It's crazy with my parents. It's so much harder. My family in general is just so much harder because I think that I have this expectation associated with that, and that fear of really and truly disappointing them. Because I think that for me, like, I've seen how much effort and time and care and sacrifices they've done to get us, but also me where I'm at, right? Like, if I told you my story about my family, it was crazy. Like, my dad came here with like $100 in a suitcase from Nigeria to Australia. He didn't know anyone but one person that happened to work at, you know, Concord Hospital. It's a random hospital. Didn't even know when their shift was. He used his last money for a taxi to go from the airport to the hospital and was walking around the hospital just looking for these persons. Didn't even know they were on shift.
Yeah.
And just happened to bump into them. Was about to go home. Anyway, he met that person, struggled. My dad's educated, like, he had degrees and stuff back at home, but he came and worked like, you know, labourer jobs and stuff like that. No disrespect, but it's just a different thing from what he's used to, right? So being through it all, we came in and we did not have, we were not lavish growing up. So to see that struggle and but my parents never ever made us feel that we were poor. Like, I never felt that. On reflection, I can now, being an adult, I can respect and reflect and be like, oh shit, that's why we ate cereal with water. You know, you know what I mean? Yeah. That makes sense. But like at the time, I never felt that. It's like, I mean, like I didn't feel like it was like I was poor. You know what I mean? Like even though I never like, you know, we didn't go to excursions, we didn't do a lot of the stuff that a lot of the kids got to do. It was more so like I always felt like I had what I needed. So when I think back about that, I always went to great schools. I always got all those opportunities. I went to tutoring, bro. Like what the F? Like what opportunity?
Yeah.
When I look back at that, I'm like, I feel like I can't let that go to shame because I've effed up, and you know what I mean, like they've come to this country, they've sacrificed so much, and there's people back home, and I'm like, I'm out here making mistakes, right? Like that feeling of like, oh, you know, I'm Femi, look at me, I just got this girl in a situation. I've just done that. I've just had this situation with me. You know what I mean? Like, how am I gonna face them? How are they gonna say like, well, the one thing's like, oh my God, you got a girl pregnant. How are you gonna tell them that? How are you gonna tell them that? And how are you gonna tell them that like, yeah, I did that, but I also got rid of it? How are you gonna have that conversation with someone?
Yeah.
How are you gonna be real with them like that? How are they gonna look at you the same? And it's like, and it's a crazy thing because it's like, wow, like yeah, I think they will still love me, but it's also like, damn, like I don't know how they would be able to be like not feel like they failed.
It's crazy because I resonate with that. I think that like for sure, definitely, and I think coming back to your point, it's like, well, that's the vulnerability, right? Like knowing all those extenuating factors, knowing all of the things that are happening, but knowing that still deep down, this is kind of me.
Yeah,
that's the challenge.
It's so crazy because it's the people that you probably hold in the highest regard that you're the most fearful of disappointing, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, for sure. That story, that I feel like for a lot of ethnics, but that story in particular, I can definitely resonate with as well. Is like, because I think that's like the big motivator for why I do things. Like when a lot of people ask me like, well, why do you do things? It's because when you think about the struggle and the challenge and, you know, what your family did to be able to get you to this point, like, I remember like even like with this, I feel like I don't know why the story sounds so familiar because I don't even tell that much of my parents' story to people as well because it's like, it's one of those things that's like when you think about it, it has that potential like, oh, what I found for myself is to put me back in that spiral of feeling guilty and shameful sometimes. So I don't really like say it. But it's definitely something that I'm working and navigating towards. So like the whole purpose of this podcast really wasn't to be like, I've got all the answers, but it's to let you know some of the challenges and struggles that even us as, you know, being who we are, people that you potentially get advice from, you know, these are the kind of the barriers and challenges that we have and potentially can learn from that. But it's powerful. It's, you know, it's really, really powerful just like laying it out there and just having that conversation.
100%. And it kind of feels scary and good at the same time. It's that kind of, that happy medium where like, you know, excellent things happen when you're in the middle of fear, but you do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing, man. And that's just how you gotta, exactly. We don't have the answers, but I really think that I would encourage you all to practice vulnerability because vulnerability is a muscle. It's not just something that comes, it's a skill, it's a muscle. It's something that needs to be practiced and grown.
100%.
But yeah.
But you know what? I really love this podcast. I think it was fun. I always like vulnerable conversations. You could be chatting for hours. You don't even realize. So, I really enjoyed this. And I think for the guys listening as well, I mean, let us know what you think. Let us know your thoughts, comment. I really want to start. I keep saying this all the time, but I promise that I really want to be like interacting and really trying to get to know everybody that's listening to the podcast and really try to answer and speak to you guys directly. I might not know all the answers, but I definitely feel confident in my ability to provide some kind of value to you. So let's interact, let's engage, comment, do what you need to do. We love to connect.
Facts.
But did you have anything that you wanted to say or you wanted to kind of wrap up here at this point?
Nah, man. Go hug somebody, people.
That's it.
You can tell them the truth.
Yes, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, look, that's it for another episode of the Uncovered Podcast. I do want to encourage you guys, though, that if you are liking these episodes and you rate what we're saying, let us know that you rate it in the reviews. Don't just be silent about it.
I know. Don't just rate it. Don't just rate it in your room, man.
Yeah.
That's not helping us get sponsorships.
No, it's not.
It's really not.
Legit. So please,
share it.
5 stars, leave a review. It means the world to us. Till then, love you all. See you guys in the next episode of the Uncovered Podcast with Nick and Femi.
Love and guidance.